I thought it might be helpful if I just showed you a couple of tricks for how you can make your text more visible and how you can have it line up and synchronize with your actual audio. So I have the young person of Smyrna here, which is not one of the ones I gave you. So I'm going to show you just real simply how to take the whole block of the limerick, the entire text of the limerick, and just bring it on word at a time and add a couple of effects to make it line up. There was a young person of Smyrna. Text, animate, position. I'm going to go under the range selector, and I'm going to go under advanced, and I'm going to have it based on words. Do that first, and then the units I'm going to do index. So the last word is 30. You want to do it by changing it to words first, or it will get confused and it will count the number of letters when you change it to index. It's just better to do the words first. Otherwise you have to count the number of words and change the last keyframe. So this is what I'm starting with. And I've got my sound file. I will drag it up above so I can see it at the same time that I'm doing the work on it. And I'll press LL to show the waveform. And then I'm going to set the start keyframe right where the sound is about to start. And then I will put the end keyframe where it is ended. So start and then take it up to 30, because that's the last word. And now I'm going to go back to the beginning here, and I'm going to move the text using the animator position, not the transform, but the animator position. And I want to move it off the screen, so I'm going to go to the first value, which is the X, and that will move it left and right. I'm going to move it in a negative direction, which will be left, and since it is this certain amount of width and whatever, it's going to be necessary to move it almost the same amount as the width of the whole frame, minus about probably a couple hundred pixels. So I'm going to move it and see how much I need to move it. And there you go. It's 1128. Takes it right off. Now I want to move it up a little bit. So in the second number, which is the Y, I'm going to move it in a negative direction again, which takes it up. And I'll move it until it's just above the upper corner. There we go. Okay. And I'm going to save that, and I'm going to play it and see what it looks like. And now it will not line up. And now that I've got the keyframes, and I can simply make sure the layer is selected, press U, and it collapses it down to it's just the keyframes. So now I'm going to press my space bar and see what that looks like.
There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her. But she seized on the cat and said, "Granny, burn that, you incongruous old woman of Smyrna."
Okay, so it's evenly spaced, which doesn't work with the sound, because the sound, he doesn't speak in a very even spacing. So what we need to do is we need to put in a keyframe for each word. So here we've got now I could just go to where each word does show up, but it's easier to get an exact number if you make a keyframe and then type the number there. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add a keyframe by clicking on this dot, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to type 2. And then I'm going to click on the dot and I'm going to type 3 and return. And just keep doing that for each word. Now when you've got a certain number, so you can start moving those keyframes where they belong and then complete the rest as you get going. So I'm going to hold down Command and listen while I drag my CTI forward.
There was a there.
Okay, so there is there, so I've got to move this keyframe up until there can show up. Let's see. I'll need more room here, so I'm going to drag this out.
There.
Okay, there. I'm going to turn off the visibility of the title action space.
There was grandmother threatened to burn her. But she seized on the cat and
20. So the next one will be 21.
said, Granny.
this one's 30. So, Granny.
Baby, burn that. Incongruous.
Okay, so incongruous is a very long word.
Woman.
Okay, here's incongruous.
Incongruous woman of Smyrna.
Okay, and Smyrna, I want to be here. So we'll see how that lines up. Sometimes you have to move the keyframes a little bit earlier because the word, you hear it and then you see it. It's better to hear it and see it at the same time.
There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her.
Okay, so let's take all these and move them up just a touch.
There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her.
Okay,
But she seized on the cat and said, Granny, burn that, you incongruous old woman of Smyrna. There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened.
Okay, whose grandmother threatened. I'm going to move those forward a little bit.
But she seized on the cat and there was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her. But she seized on the cat and said, Granny, burn that, you incongruous old woman of Smyrna.
Okay, so incongruous. You incongruous. I think we want to have that one just a little earlier.
Incongruous old woman of Smyrna.
Okay, so those look pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Now let's add some more fun stuff to it because that's very bland. But in order to make it more easy to read, I'm going to add an effect. I'm going to go to Stylize. To make it stand out more, I'm going to use Color Emboss. So that will color emboss the text. And then I'm going to go up to Perspective and I'm going to add a drop shadow. Maybe move it just a little bit closer. So the drop shadow's got a distance of 5. Let's make it a distance of 3. Nah, that's not enough, so 4. We'll go with 4. That's good. So there was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her. She seized on the cat and said, Granny, burn that. Now, let's see if there's something else fun we can do. So we can add to this animator, add a property of scale. We can make it a little larger, 150%, maybe 200%. Now, let's add a property of tracking. And let's have the tracking amount also be 200. Let's add a property of blur. We'll have it blur 30. That sounds good. Okay, so now let's see what that looks like.
There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her.
But she seized on the cat and said, Granny, burn that, you incongruous old woman of Smyrna.
There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her. But she seized on the cat and said, Granny, burn that, you incongruous old woman of Smyrna.
So that's kind of fun.
There was a young person of Smyrna.
Now, something else you can do, and this is gonna be kind of wild. You can also, I'm gonna add a property of rotation too, just to be really wild, okay? And then for the rotation, I'll say 1, and so this will make it real interesting. So the words will spin around, or the letters will spin around, which is kind of fun. And now we can add what's called a wiggly selector. And that makes everything really interesting.
There was a young person
of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her. But she seized on the cat and said, Granny, burn that, you incongruous old woman of Smyrna.
There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her. But she seized on the cat and said, Granny, burn that, you incongruous old woman of Smyrna.
So you see, there's a lot of things you can do with the animators. And I'm not saying, oh, you have to do all these, but just be aware of all the different variety of choices you can make. And you can have it do it to the entire block of text, or you can do it to just individual words, or you can have it do it to each line separately, depending on what layers you put them on. So if you broke it down into layers, you could have different things happening to each set of whatever words you have on each layer. And so keep thinking about that and have fun. Try some new stuff.
There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her. But she seized on the cat and said, Granny, burn that, you incongruous old woman of Smyrna.